The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Ravenshollow Castle like a shroud, and Eleanor pulled her threadbare cloak tighter around her shoulders as she hurried across the courtyard. At 17, she had learned to move like a ghost through these halls, invisible, silent, unworthy of notice. Her bare feet made no sound against the cold stone as she balanced the heavy water buckets, her arms aching from the weight. "Look at the little rat scurrying about," sneered Lady Vivian from her window above. The Earl's cousin had arrived 3 days ago with her entourage, and Eleanor had become her favourite target. "Tell me, creature, do you even bathe? You smell like the stables." The other noble ladies tittered behind their silk fans, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Eleanor kept her eyes downcast, her cheeks burning with familiar shame. She had been found as an infant on the castle steps 15 years ago, wrapped in nothing but rough burlap. The head cook, Margaret, had taken pity and raised her, but even Margaret reminded Eleanor daily that she was nothing more than charity, a burden to be endured. "She's not even fit to clean our chamber pots," Lady Catherine added, her voice dripping with disdain. "Why the Earl tolerates such filth in his household is beyond comprehension." Eleanor's hands trembled as she set down the buckets near the kitchen entrance. The water sloshed, some spilling onto her already stained brown dress, the only dress she owned. Through the great hall's windows, she could see the preparations for tonight's feast. Lords and ladies from neighbouring estates would gather to celebrate the harvest, their silks and velvets a stark contrast to her rough-spun wool. "Eleanor!" Margaret's voice boomed from the kitchen. "Stop your dawdling. The rushes in the great hall need changing, and Lord Blackwood's chambers require fresh linens." Eleanor winced. Lord Aldrich Blackwood, the Earl of Ravenshollow, had returned from his travels to the King's Court just yesterday. She had glimpsed him only once, a tall figure in midnight blue velvet, his dark hair catching the candlelight as he spoke with his steward. The servants whispered that he was different from his late father, kinder, more just, but Eleanor had learned not to hope for kindness from nobles. As she gathered the soiled rushes from the great hall floor, her movements careful to avoid the preparing servants, Eleanor allowed herself a moment to dream. What would it be like to wear silk instead of scratchy wool? To have hair that gleamed with oils instead of hanging limp and dull? To be wanted somewhere, by someone? Dreaming again, are we? Eleanor spun around to find Thomas, the head groom's son, watching her with cruel amusement. At 19, he had recently decided that tormenting Eleanor was preferable to his usual stable duties. "I wasn't," Eleanor began, but Thomas cut her off. "The ladies are right, you know," he said, stepping closer. His breath reeked of ale and something else, something sour and unpleasant. "You're nothing but gutter trash. The Earl should have let you die on those steps instead of wasting food on a worthless mouth." The words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She had heard them all before, in different forms from different mouths, but they never stopped hurting. She clutched the bundle of old rushes tighter, using them as a shield between herself and Thomas. "Please," she whispered, "I have work to finish." Thomas laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the stone walls. "Work? You call what you do work? My father's dogs contribute more to this household than you do." From somewhere behind her, Eleanor heard the soft whisper of footsteps on stone, but she dared not turn around. Thomas's face suddenly went pale, his cruel smile freezing before melting into something resembling panic. My lord," Thomas stammered, dropping into a hasty bow. I was helping the girl with her duties." Eleanor felt her blood turn to ice water. Slowly, barely breathing, she turned around to see Lord Aldrich Blackwood standing not 5 paces behind her. He was even more imposing up close, tall and broad-shouldered, with intelligent grey eyes that seemed to see everything. His dark hair was perfectly groomed, his clothing rich but not ostentatious. Everything about him spoke of power and nobility, making Eleanor acutely aware of her own shabby appearance. "Helping," Lord Blackwood repeated, his voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable edge. "How generous of you, Thomas. Though from where I stood it appeared more like harassment." Thomas's face flushed red. "My lord, I would never. Return to your duties." the Earl said, his tone brooking no argument. "And Thomas, if I hear of you helping any of the servants again in such a manner, you'll find yourself seeking employment elsewhere. Do I make myself clear?" Yes, my lord, perfectly clear." Thomas fled without another word, leaving Eleanor alone with the Earl. The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the floor, waiting for her own dismissal or punishment. Noble lords did not waste time on orphan servants unless they had transgressed somehow. "Look at me," Lord Blackwood said softly. Eleanor's head snapped up before she could stop herself, her green eyes meeting his grey ones for just a moment before she looked away again. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What is your name?" he asked. "Eleanor, my lord," she whispered. "Eleanor." He said it slowly, as if testing how it sounded. "How long have you lived at Ravens Hollow?" 15 years, my lord, since I was found as an infant." She risked another glance at his face and was surprised to see something that might have been compassion in his expression. It was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "And you work in the kitchens?" "I work wherever I'm needed, my lord. Kitchens, laundry, cleaning chambers, tending fires." Eleanor trailed off, realizing she was babbling. Lord Blackwood nodded slowly. "I see." He was quiet for a moment, then, "The preparations for tonight's feast. Are you involved in those?" Eleanor shook her head quickly. "Oh, no, my lord, I'm not. That is, I'm not suitable for such important work. I'll be cleaning up afterward." "Not suitable," he repeated, and there was something odd in his voice. "Who decided that?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. Who had decided? Margaret, she supposed, and the other senior servants. It had simply always been that way. It's always been so, my lord. I'm only—" She struggled for words that wouldn't sound self-pitying. "I'm not trained for finer work." Lord Blackwood studied her face with an intensity that made Eleanor want to hide. "You have education, letters, numbers." Eleanor nodded hesitantly. "Margaret, the head cook, she taught me to read and cipher. She said it would make me more useful." "Indeed it would." The Earl's expression grew thoughtful. "Eleanor, I want you to attend tonight's feast." Eleanor's bundle of rushes tumbled to the floor. "My lord." "Not as a servant," he continued, seemingly oblivious to her shock. "As a guest." "But my lord, I don't have—" Eleanor gestured helplessly at her appearance. "Leave that to me," Lord Blackwood said firmly. "Be in the solar at sunset. Someone will help you prepare." He turned to go, then paused. "Eleanor, the next time someone calls you trash, remember this. A person's worth isn't determined by their birth or their circumstances. It's determined by their character, their kindness, their strength in the face of adversity. You've survived 15 years in a world that told you that you were worthless, yet you still carry yourself with dignity. That tells me more about your true value than any noble title ever could." With that he was gone, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the great hall, her mind reeling. The Earl of Ravenshollow had not only defended her, he had invited her to the feast, as a guest. For the first time in her life, Eleanor began to wonder if perhaps she might be worth something after all. Eleanor stood outside the solar door as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain the entire castle could hear it. Her work-roughened hand trembled as she raised it to knock, then fell to her side again. What was she doing here? This had to be some cruel joke, a way for the nobles to humiliate her further by parading her inadequacy before the entire feast. The door opened before she could flee. "You must be Eleanor," said a warm voice. A woman in her 30s stood in the doorway, her brown hair neatly braided, and her simple but well-made dress marking her as one of the upper servants. "I'm Anne, Lord Blackwood's personal attendant. Please come in." Eleanor stepped into the solar and her breath caught. The room glowed with the light of dozens of candles, their flames dancing across tapestries that depicted scenes of courtly life. But what truly made her gasp was the gown laid carefully across the window seat, a dress of deep emerald silk that seemed to capture and hold the candlelight. "Is that—" Eleanor couldn't finish the question. "For you," Anne confirmed with a smile. Lord Blackwood had it brought from his mother's wardrobe. She was about your size, God rest her soul. Anne approached the dress reverently. She would have liked knowing it was being worn by someone who needed beauty in their life. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. I can't wear something so fine. What if I damage it? What if I'm not worthy of— Stop! Anne's voice was kind but firm. Lord Blackwood chose you for this evening, and his judgment is not to be questioned. Besides, she added with a conspiratorial smile, I've been watching you work these past few years. You move with more natural grace than half the ladies who visit this castle. Anne began to unlace Eleanor's rough dress, and Eleanor stood frozen with embarrassment. No one had seen her unclothed since she was a small child, and her body bore the marks of her hard life, calloused hands, a thin scar on her forearm from a kitchen accident, the pallor of someone who spent little time in sunlight. You're lovely, Anne said simply, as if reading her thoughts. Truly lovely. Now, into the bath with you. Eleanor hadn't noticed the copper tub in the corner, filled with steaming water that smelled of lavender and something else, something expensive and floral. As she sank into the warm water, she felt muscles she didn't know she'd been tensing begin to relax. Anne worked fragrant oils into her hair, her touch gentle and practiced. Anne, Eleanor said hesitantly as the woman massaged her scalp, why is Lord Blackwood doing this? I'm nobody, less than nobody. What could he possibly gain? Anne was quiet for a moment, her hands never pausing in their work. I've served Lord Aldrich since he was a boy, she finally said. His father was a hard man, cold. He believed that showing kindness was weakness, and he ruled through fear and intimidation. She reached for a cloth and began washing Eleanor's shoulders. But Aldrich was different from the start. Even as a child, he would sneak food to hungry servants, help the stable boys with their work when the master wasn't looking, spend his coin on medicine for sick villagers. Eleanor absorbed this information in wonder. He sounds too good to be true. He's not perfect, Anne admitted. He has a temper when roused, and he can be stubborn to a fault, but he has something many nobles lack. He genuinely cares about people. All people. Not just those with titles and gold. She began rinsing Eleanor's hair. I think when he saw you today, he saw someone who deserved better than the cruelty that's been shown to her. After the bath, Anne dried Eleanor's hair and began the transformation in earnest. She rubbed scented oils into Eleanor's skin until it glowed, then helped her into the silk chemise and the emerald gown. The fabric felt like water against Eleanor's skin, soft and cool and impossibly luxurious. Now for your hair, Anne murmured, seating Eleanor before a polished metal mirror. Eleanor barely recognized the reflection staring back at her. Clean and dressed in silk, she looked like she belonged in this room. Anne worked her damp hair into an elegant arrangement, weaving small pearls through the strands and allowing soft tendrils to frame her face. The final touch, Anne said, fastening a delicate silver necklace around Eleanor's throat. This belonged to Lord Blackwood's mother as well. She always said that jewels should be worn by those who understand their true value, not their price, but their power to make someone feel beautiful. Eleanor touched the pendant reverently. I feel like I'm dreaming. You look like a dream, Anne replied warmly. Now there are a few things you should know about tonight. Anne quickly explained the basics of feast etiquette, which cup to drink from, how to hold her eating knife, the order of courses. Eleanor absorbed everything with the quick intelligence that had helped her survive castle life, though her nervousness continued to grow. What if they laugh at me? Eleanor asked, as Anne made final adjustments to her gown. What if they can tell I don't belong? Then they're fools, Anne said firmly. Eleanor, you've spent 15 years in this castle. You know these people better than they know themselves. You've cleaned their chambers, heard their conversations when they thought no one was listening, seen them at their worst. Tonight you're their equal. Remember that. A trumpet sounded in the distance, announcing the beginning of the feast. Anne squeezed Eleanor's shoulders gently. Lord Blackwood will be waiting at the bottom of the stairs to escort you in, she said. Remember, you belong here tonight. You are his guest, and anyone who dares suggest otherwise will answer to him." Eleanor made her way down the winding stone stairs, her silk slippers silent on the steps. The closer she got to the great hall, the louder the sounds of celebration became. Laughter, music, the clink of goblets and cutlery. At the bottom of the stairs, as promised, stood Lord Aldrich Blackwood. He was magnificent in midnight blue velvet and silver, his dark hair perfectly arranged, but it was his expression when he saw her that took Eleanor's breath away. His grey eyes widened, and something that might have been awe crossed his features. "My Lady Eleanor," he said, offering her his arm with a bow that would have been appropriate for a duchess. "You look absolutely radiant." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "My lord, thank you for everything. The gown, the kindness. I don't know how to repay." "There is nothing to repay," he said firmly, covering her hand with his as she took his arm. "Tonight, you are my honored guest, and anyone who doesn't treat you with the respect you deserve will find themselves explaining their rudeness to me personally." As they approached the entrance to the great hall, Eleanor could hear the conversation dying away, replaced by shocked whispers. She lifted her chin, remembering Anne's words, and walked beside Lord Blackwood as if she'd been doing it all her life. "My lords and ladies," Lord Blackwood announced as they entered, his voice carrying easily through the sudden silence. "May I present Lady Eleanor, my honored guest this evening?" The silence stretched for a heartbeat longer. Then Lord Blackwood led Eleanor to the high table, seating her at his right hand, the position traditionally reserved for the most honored guest. Eleanor was acutely aware of every eye in the hall upon her, of the whispers that had begun to buzz like angry wasps. "That's the kitchen drudge," she heard Lady Vivian hiss to her companion. "What sort of game is he playing?" But Lord Blackwood seemed oblivious to the whispers. He filled Eleanor's goblet with wine, made sure she was served the finest portions of each course, and conversed with her as naturally as if they'd known each other for years rather than hours. "Tell me about your reading," he said as servants brought the second course, roasted fowl with herbs that smelled heavenly. "What sorts of books do you favor?" Eleanor nearly choked on her wine. No one had ever asked her about books before. Most of the castle residents didn't even know she could read. Whatever Margaret can spare from the household accounts," she managed. "Scripture mostly, and sometimes volumes on household management or herb lore." Practical reading," Lord Blackwood nodded approvingly. "But what would you choose to read, if you could read anything at all?" Eleanor thought for a moment, aware that half the hall was straining to hear her answer. I think I'd like to read about other places, other countries, other ways of life. Sometimes I wonder what lies beyond Ravenshallow's walls. A desire for knowledge and adventure," the Earl mused. "Admirable qualities." He turned to address the table at large. "How many of us can say we truly hunger for learning? How many seek to expand our understanding of the world beyond our own experience?" Eleanor caught the pointed look he gave several of the younger lords, who had the grace to look slightly ashamed of their obvious lack of intellectual curiosity. As the evening progressed, Eleanor found herself relaxing despite the continued stares and whispers. Lord Blackwood was an engaging conversationalist, asking her opinions on everything from castle management to the treatment of the common folk. To her amazement, he actually listened to her answers and responded with thoughtful comments of his own. "You have insights that many of my advisors lack," he told her quietly, as the musicians struck up a dancing song. "You see this castle and its people from a perspective that's invaluable, the view from below rather than above. May I have this dance, Lady Eleanor?" Eleanor looked up to find Sir Marcus, one of Lord Blackwood's knights, standing beside the table with an encouraging smile. Behind him, several other young men waited hopefully, apparently emboldened by their lord's obvious approval of his unusual guest. Eleanor glanced at Lord Blackwood, who nodded encouragingly. "Go on," he said warmly. "Enjoy yourself. That's what tonight is for." As Eleanor took Sir Marcus's hand and allowed him to lead her to the dancing area, she caught sight of Lady Vivian's face, twisted with fury and disbelief. Other ladies whispered behind their hands, their expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. But Eleanor found that she didn't care as much as she'd expected. For one night, just one magical night, she was someone else. Someone valued, someone worthy of kindness and attention, someone who belonged. As Sir Marcus guided her through the steps of a simple country dance, Eleanor caught Lord Blackwood watching from the high table, his expression unreadable, but his attention focused entirely on her. When their eyes met across the crowded hall, he raised his goblet to her in a small private salute. For the first time in her 15 years at Ravenshollow Castle, Eleanor felt truly alive. Eleanor woke the next morning to the harsh clatter of her chamber door being thrown open. The pale light of dawn filtered through the single narrow window of the servants' quarters, and for a moment she lay still, wondering if the previous evening had been nothing more than an elaborate dream. But the emerald gown hanging carefully on a peg, cleaned and pressed by Anne before being returned to Eleanor's keeping, proved that it had all been real. Every magical, impossible moment of it. "Get up, you lazy creature!" Margaret's voice cut through Eleanor's drowsy contentment like a blade. The head cook stood in the doorway, her face mottled with rage. "Do you think because his lordship played some cruel joke last night that you're excused from your duties?" Eleanor sat up quickly, her head still fuzzy with sleep and the remnants of wine from the feast. "Margaret, Don't you Margaret me, girl." The older woman stalked into the small chamber, her heavy footsteps shaking the floorboards. "The entire castle is buzzing with talk of your shameful display. Parading around in silk like you belonged there, taking food from the mouths of your betters." The word stung, but Eleanor forced herself to remain calm. "Lord Blackwood invited me. I was his guest." Margaret's laugh was bitter and ugly. "His guest? Listen to yourself putting on airs. You're a foundling, Eleanor, a charity case, and now you've made a spectacle of yourself and this household." She grabbed Eleanor's arm roughly, hauling her to her feet. "Lord Blackwood may have his reasons for humiliating his guests with your presence, but it changes nothing about what you are." Eleanor pulled free of Margaret's grip, something inside her rebelling against the familiar pattern of abuse. What if it does change something? What if— The slap came without warning, snapping Eleanor's head to the side and bringing tears to her eyes. Margaret had never struck her before, but the fury in the woman's face promised more violence if Eleanor continued to speak. "You will remember your place," Margaret hissed. "You will do your work, keep your mouth shut, and be grateful for the roof over your head and the food in your belly, and you will never, never presume to rise above your station again." Eleanor pressed her hand to her burning cheek, fighting back tears of anger and humiliation. After the kindness Lord Blackwood had shown her, after feeling for one night like she might be worth something, the return to her old life felt impossibly cruel. Margaret thrust Eleanor's rough brown dress at her. "Put this on and get to the kitchens. The feast left twice the usual mess, and you'll be cleaning it until midday if you're lucky." She turned toward the door, then paused. "And, Eleanor, if you have any sense at all, you'll stay away from his lordship. Men like him don't play games with girls like you unless they want something specific, and you won't like what that something is." Left alone, Eleanor dressed slowly, her movements mechanical. The rough wool felt like sackcloth against skin that remembered silk, and her reflection in the small mirror showed only the same plain servant girl she'd always been. Had last night really happened? Or had she simply imagined the whole thing? The great hall, when she reached it, was a disaster. Rushes soaked with spilled wine covered the floor, tables bore the sticky remnants of the feast, and goblets and trenchers lay scattered about like the aftermath of a battle. Eleanor set to work without complaint, though each task felt harder than usual. Her hands, soft from Anne's care the night before, quickly returned to their familiar ache. "Well, well," came a familiar sneering voice. "If it isn't Lady Eleanor herself." Eleanor looked up to see Lady Vivian approaching, flanked by two other noble ladies. All three wore expressions of malicious amusement, like cats who had cornered a particularly interesting mouse. "I trust you enjoyed your little masquerade last night?" Lady Vivian continued, circling Eleanor like a predator. "Though I confess I can't quite fathom what game Lord Blackwood was playing. Perhaps he wished to demonstrate the difference between true nobility and, well," she gestured dismissively at Eleanor's appearance, "perhaps he simply wanted to show kindness," Eleanor said quietly, not looking up from the rushes she was gathering. Lady Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "Kindness? Oh, you sweet, naive little thing. Men don't show kindness to servant girls without expecting payment." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And we all know what sort of payment men prefer from pretty young maids." Eleanor's cheeks burned with shame and anger. "Lord Blackwood isn't like that." "Isn't he?" Lady Vivian smiled coldly. "You know him so well after one evening? How touching." She gestured to her companions. "Tell me, Eleanor, may I call you Eleanor, or do you prefer my lady now? What exactly did his lordship whisper in your ear during those intimate conversations at the high table?" Eleanor's hands stilled in their work. She remembered Lord Blackwood's words clearly: encouragement about her intelligence, interest in her thoughts on castle management, gentle questions about her dreams and aspirations. But spoken aloud to these women, such conversations would sound impossibly unlikely. He was simply being polite to a guest," Eleanor managed. "Polite," Lady Vivian repeated mockingly. "How charming! And when he escorted you in on his arm, seated you in the place of honor, made sure you received the finest portions, that was all politeness as well." Eleanor said nothing, sensing a trap but unable to see its shape. "Let me explain something to you, dear Eleanor," Lady Vivian continued, her voice taking on a falsely motherly tone. "Noble lords don't elevate kitchen maids to high tables out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it because they want something, usually something that requires privacy and gratitude." She smiled cruelly. "How long do you think it will be before he summons you to his chambers for a private audience? How long before he expects you to show your appreciation for his kindness in the most intimate way possible?" "That's not—" "He wouldn't," Eleanor stammered, but doubt was already beginning to creep in. Why had Lord Blackwood singled her out? What could she possibly offer a man of his position and power? "Mark my words," Lady Catherine chimed in. "Within a fortnight, you'll either be warming his bed, or you'll be cast out of this castle entirely. Men like him don't tolerate refusal from women like you." The three ladies swept away in a rustle of silk, leaving Eleanor alone with her doubts and the physical reminders of her station. She tried to push their words aside, but they lodged in her mind like thorns, poisoning the memory of the previous evening. Could they be right? Had Lord Blackwood's kindness been nothing more than an elaborate seduction? The thought made Eleanor feel sick, but she couldn't entirely dismiss it. She was a nobody. What reason could he possibly have for treating her as an equal, unless he wanted something in return? Eleanor was so lost in her troubled thoughts that she didn't notice the approaching footsteps until a familiar voice said, "Good morning, Eleanor." She looked up to find Lord Blackwood standing nearby, dressed for travel in practical leather and wool. His expression was warm, his eyes kind, the same eyes that had looked at her with such apparent respect the night before. Now Eleanor found herself wondering what he was really thinking behind that handsome facade. "My lord," she said, dropping into a hasty curtsy and keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. "Please, there's no need for such formality," Lord Blackwood said gently. "I wanted to thank you for gracing us with your presence last night. You were a delightful companion, and I hope you enjoyed yourself." Eleanor's throat felt tight. "It was very kind of you, my lord, but I should return to my work now." She started to move away, but Lord Blackwood stepped closer. "Eleanor, is something wrong? You seem distressed." The genuine concern in his voice almost broke Eleanor's resolve. Part of her wanted to look up, to see if the kindness in his eyes was real or feigned. But Lady Vivian's words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. "I'm fine, my lord. Just remembering my place." There was a long silence. When Lord Blackwood spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. "I see. And what place is that, exactly?" Eleanor forced herself to look up then, and what she saw in his expression surprised her. Hurt, certainly, but also anger. Not at her, but seemingly at something else entirely. "I'm a servant, my lord," she said quietly. "Nothing more. Last night it was a beautiful dream, but dreams end." Lord Blackwood's jaw tightened. "Who told you that? Who made you feel that what happened last night was somehow wrong?" Eleanor shook her head, unwilling to name names. "It doesn't matter, my lord. They were right to remind me." "They were wrong," Lord Blackwood interrupted, his voice sharp with anger. "Whoever they are, they were completely and utterly wrong." He took a step closer, his grey eyes intense. "Eleanor, I want you to listen to me very carefully. What I did last night, inviting you to the feast, treating you as an honored guest, I did because I believe you deserve respect and kindness. Not because I expect anything in return, not because I see you as some sort of conquest, but because you are a person of worth who has been treated badly for far too long." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "But why? Why me? I'm nothing special." "You're wrong," Lord Blackwood said firmly. "In one evening, you showed more grace, intelligence, and genuine nobility than most of the so-called ladies at that table. You have survived 15 years of hardship without becoming bitter or cruel. You have educated yourself despite having every reason to simply accept your circumstances. You have maintained your dignity in the face of constant humiliation." His voice softened. "How can you not see that those qualities make you extraordinary?" Eleanor stared at him, wanting desperately to believe his words but afraid to hope. "People are saying, they're saying you must want something from me, something inappropriate." Lord Blackwood's expression darkened with fury. "Let them say what they will. I know the truth, and more importantly, so do you." He reached out as if to touch her face, then seemed to think better of it. "Eleanor, I'm leaving this afternoon for London on business for the King. I'll be gone for several weeks. While I'm away, I want you to think about what you truly want from life. Not what others tell you to want, not what seems practical or safe, but what you actually dream of." He started to turn away, then paused. "And Eleanor, when I return, we will discuss your future. Because despite what anyone else might think or say, I believe you deserve better than spending your life being treated as less than you are." With that, he was gone, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the great hall with her heart racing and her mind spinning with possibility and fear. As she returned to her work, Eleanor tried to sort through the confusion of her emotions. Lord Blackwood's words had rung with sincerity, but was she simply hearing what she wanted to hear? And even if his intentions were honourable, what future could there possibly be for an orphan servant and an earl? The questions would haunt her for weeks to come. But for the first time in her life, Eleanor found herself daring to imagine a life beyond the walls of the servants' quarters. Perhaps that was the most dangerous dream of all. 3 weeks had passed since Lord Blackwood's departure for London, and Eleanor had settled back into the familiar rhythm of servant life, with one crucial difference. She now carried herself with a quiet dignity that no amount of cruelty could fully extinguish. The memory of silk against her skin and respectful conversation had planted something unshakable in her heart. The knowledge that she was capable of more than scrubbing floors and emptying chamber pots. The autumn air was crisp as Eleanor hung laundry in the castle's inner courtyard, her breath forming small clouds in the morning chill. The leaves on the great oak tree had turned brilliant shades of gold and crimson, and she found herself pausing in her work to appreciate their beauty, something she never would have done before that magical night at the feast. "Still putting on airs, I see," came a familiar sneer. Eleanor turned to find Thomas approaching, flanked by 2 other stable hands she didn't recognize. His face bore a cruel smirk that made her stomach clench with dread. "I'm simply doing my work," Eleanor replied evenly, continuing to pin sheets to the line. "Your work?" Thomas laughed harshly. "Tell me, Eleanor, what exactly did you do to earn his lordship's attention? What special services did you provide?" The implication in his words made Eleanor's cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "Lord Blackwood showed me kindness because he's a good man, that's all. Kindness, one of the other men repeated mockingly. That's what they're calling it now? How convenient. He stepped closer, and Eleanor caught the stench of unwashed bodies and stale ale. But his lordship's been gone for weeks now. I'm sure you're lonely, missing his kindness. Eleanor backed toward the castle wall, her heart beginning to race. There was something different about Thomas today, a dangerous edge that hadn't been there before. Perhaps we could show you some kindness of our own, the third man suggested with a leer that made Eleanor feel sick. Leave me alone, Eleanor said firmly, though her voice wavered slightly. I have work to finish. Oh, you have work to finish, Thomas agreed, advancing on her. But not the kind you're thinking of. Eleanor's back hit the stone wall, and panic flared in her chest. She was trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to hear if she screamed. The laundry courtyard was secluded, chosen specifically because it was quiet and out of the way. Please, she whispered, hating how small her voice sounded. Don't do this. Thomas reached out to grab her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh through the thin fabric of her sleeve. You should have remembered your place, girl. Should have stayed in the shadows where you belong. Remove your hands from her, now. The voice cut through the courtyard like a blade, cold and sharp, with barely contained fury. All four of them froze, and Eleanor's heart leaped with desperate hope. Lord Aldrich Blackwood stood at the courtyard entrance, and Eleanor had never seen him look so dangerous. He was travel-stained and weary, his dark cloak mud-splattered from the road, but his grey eyes blazed with an anger that made the air itself seem to crackle. Thomas dropped Eleanor's arm as if it had burned him, stumbling backward. My lord, we were just— I know exactly what you were doing, Lord Blackwood said, his voice deadly quiet as he advanced into the courtyard. The question is whether you're stupid enough to continue. The three men exchanged panicked glances. They clearly hadn't expected the Earl to return so soon, and certainly hadn't expected to be caught in the act of threatening his guest. My lord, there's been a misunderstanding, Thomas stammered. The girl was— The girl, Lord Blackwood interrupted, is under my protection. Did I not make that clear before I left? He was close enough now that Eleanor could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the way his hand rested on the pommel of his sword. Perhaps I was too subtle in my previous warning. One of Thomas's companions, clearly brighter than the other two, began backing toward the courtyard exit. We'll just go back to our duties, my lord. No harm done. No harm done. Lord Blackwood's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow seemed louder than a shout. You cornered a defenseless woman, trapped her against a wall, and threatened her with violence. You call that no harm? Eleanor watched in amazement as Thomas, who had tormented her for years, began to tremble like a leaf in the wind. Please, my lord, Thomas begged. We didn't mean any real harm. We were just having a bit of fun. Fun. Lord Blackwood stepped closer to Thomas, and the younger man actually whimpered. Tell me, Thomas, would you consider it fun if I had you tied to a post in the courtyard and let every woman in this castle have their way with you? Would that be amusing? Thomas went white as parchment. No, my lord. Then why? Lord Blackwood continued, his voice still that terrifying whisper. Would you imagine that Eleanor would find your attentions any more welcome? He turned to address all three men, his commanding presence making them seem small and pathetic. You will pack your belongings and leave Ravenshollow immediately. I will provide you with a day's wages and nothing more. If I ever see any of your faces on my lands again, I will have you hanged as the criminals you are. But my lord, Thomas protested desperately, where will we go? What will we do? Perhaps you should have considered that before you decided to threaten my people. Lord Blackwood replied coldly. You have 1 hour. Be gone. The three men fled without another word, leaving Eleanor alone with the Earl in the suddenly quiet courtyard. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the only sounds the whisper of autumn wind through the dying leaves and the distant calls of birds. Are you hurt? Lord Blackwood asked, his voice gentle now, all traces of that frightening anger gone. Eleanor shook her head, though she was still trembling from the encounter. No, my lord, they didn't. You arrived in time. Lord Blackwood's expression darkened again. They shouldn't have been able to corner you at all. This is my fault. I should have foreseen that my absence might embolden those who wished you harm." "It's not your fault," Eleanor said quickly. "You can't be expected to protect everyone from everything." "I can be expected to protect those under my care," Lord Blackwood replied firmly. "And you, Eleanor, are very much under my care." Something in the way he said it made Eleanor's heart skip. There was a possessiveness in his tone, but not the crude ownership Thomas had displayed. This was different, protective, caring, almost tender. "My lord," Eleanor began hesitantly, "why do you care so much about what happens to me? I still don't understand." "Don't you?" Lord Blackwood stepped closer, close enough that Eleanor could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes. "Eleanor, I've spent 3 weeks in London thinking about very little but you, about your intelligence, your grace under pressure, the way you listened when I spoke as if my words actually mattered to you." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. "My lord, I've watched you for years," he continued, his voice soft but intense. "Long before that night at the feast, I've seen how you work without complaint, how you're kind to the younger servants, how you bear insults and cruelty with dignity. Do you know how rare that is? How precious?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm just a servant." "You're not just anything," Lord Blackwood said firmly, reaching out to cup her face gently in his hands. "You're extraordinary, Eleanor. You're intelligent and kind and beautiful, and you deserve so much more than the life you've been given. But the difference in our stations," Eleanor whispered, even as she leaned into his touch, "means nothing to me," Lord Blackwood said. "Eleanor, I'm not asking you to be my mistress or my temporary amusement. I'm asking you to be my wife." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She stared at him in shock, certain she must have misheard. Your wife?" she stammered. "My wife," Lord Blackwood confirmed, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall down her cheeks. "My partner, my equal, my treasure, because that's what you are to me, Eleanor. Not trash, not a burden, not a charity case, but a treasure beyond price." Eleanor felt her knees go weak. "But I have no dowry, no family name, no—" "You have yourself," Lord Blackwood said, pulling her closer. "Your courage, your kindness, your brilliant mind. What more could I possibly want?" "The other nobles will never accept it," Eleanor protested, even as her heart soared with impossible hope. "They'll say you've lost your mind, marrying a foundling." "Let them say what they will," Lord Blackwood replied. "I'm the Earl of Ravenshollow, and I'll marry whom I choose. And I choose you, Eleanor. I choose you because you see the world clearly, because you're not blinded by wealth or position, because you have a good heart and a strong spirit." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I choose you because I've fallen completely and irrevocably in love with you." Eleanor felt as if she might faint from the sheer impossibility of it all. "You love me?" "With all my heart," Lord Blackwood confirmed. "The question is, can you love me in return? Not as your lord, not as the Earl, but as a man who wants nothing more than to spend his life making you happy." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope, and a love so deep it took her breath away. This man, this wonderful, impossible man, truly loved her. Not for her beauty or her position or what she could give him, but simply for who she was. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I can love you. I do love you. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day when you defended me from Thomas." Lord Blackwood's smile was radiant. "Then will you marry me, my darling Eleanor? Will you be my countess, and let me spend every day for the rest of our lives proving that you are indeed my greatest treasure?" Eleanor threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, of course I will." Lord Blackwood lifted her off her feet and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure joy. When he set her down, he kissed her gently, sweetly, as if she were made of spun glass. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "My Eleanor, my treasure, my heart." "And I love you," Eleanor replied, marveling at how natural the words felt. "My Aldrich, my lord, my future husband." till as they held each other in the autumn courtyard, surrounded by golden leaves and warm sunlight, Eleanor finally understood what it felt like to be truly valued. She was no longer the orphan girl who was mocked as trash. She was the Earl's treasure, his chosen bride, his beloved, and for the first time in her life, Eleanor knew exactly where she belonged. The great cathedral of London had never seen a wedding quite like this one. Eleanor stood at the altar in a gown of ivory silk and gold thread, her hair crowned with orange blossoms and pearls, looking every inch the noble woman she had become. Beside her, Aldrich was resplendent in midnight blue velvet, his face radiant with happiness as he spoke his vows. I, Aldrich, take thee, Eleanor, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. Eleanor's voice was clear and strong as she replied, I, Eleanor, take thee, Aldrich, to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. In the month since their engagement, Eleanor had been transformed, not just in appearance, though the finest tutors and seamstresses in England had seen to that, but in confidence and bearing. She had learned to walk like a countess, speak like a countess, and most importantly, to believe that she deserved to be a countess. The congregation was filled with an interesting mix of guests. The high nobility sat somewhat stiffly in their finery, still uncertain about their host's unusual choice of bride, but the common folk of Ravenshollow, who had travelled all the way to London for the occasion, beamed with pride and joy. Their beloved lord had chosen one of their own, and Eleanor had become a symbol of hope for every servant and peasant in the realm. Lady Vivian sat in the third row, her face a mask of forced politeness, while Margaret, dressed in her finest gown and weeping openly, occupied a place of honour near the front, living proof that even the hardest hearts could be changed by witnessing true love. As the priest pronounced them man and wife, Aldrich cupped Eleanor's face gently and kissed her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. My treasure, he whispered, just for her. My heart, Eleanor replied, tears of joy streaming down her face. The wedding feast that followed was magnificent, but Eleanor barely tasted the fine foods or expensive wines. She was too busy marvelling at her new life, at the husband who looked at her as if she had hung the stars in the sky, at the future that stretched ahead of them bright with possibility. During the dancing, as Aldrich led her through the steps of a courtly measure, Eleanor caught sight of a young kitchen maid watching from the doorway, her expression wistful and yearning. Eleanor smiled and nodded to the girl, a gesture that said, You too are worthy. You too deserve kindness. You too have value. The maid's face lit up with hope, and Eleanor felt her heart swell with purpose. As Countess of Ravenshollow, she would ensure that no servant in her household ever felt worthless or forgotten. She would be the voice for those who had none, the protector of the vulnerable, the living proof that a person's worth was not determined by their birth. What are you thinking about, my love? Aldrich asked softly as he spun her gently. The future, Eleanor replied, gazing up at the man who had seen her true value when no one else could. And how sometimes the most precious treasures are found in the most unexpected places. Aldrich's smile was tender and proud. Indeed they are, my darling. Indeed they are. As they danced beneath the glittering candles of the great hall, Eleanor felt the last traces of doubt and fear fall away. She was no longer the orphan girl who had been mocked as trash. She was Eleanor, Countess of Ravenshollow, beloved wife of a good man, and living proof that love truly could conquer all. She was at last exactly where she belonged.